We're talking about reproduction and heredity today. So let me just share this PowerPoint. So heredity and genetics. So basically what this is how species reproduce. Basically all living species reproduce in some way. There are two main types of reproduction, which is asexual and sexual. In asexual, this is like where basically something clones itself. So there are certain species that just basically break off, especially like single cell organisms. They'll just sort of break into two or hatch an egg or something off of themselves, where it's a genetic copy. But a lot of species, most species, reproduce sexually, which is where you need two sets of DNA, usually a male and a female, not always, that combine and form an offspring. And that's where we get heredity, because some genes are passed down and some aren't. You'll notice in certain families, some people have blue eyes and some people have brown eyes. If you've got a family where everyone has brown eyes, that is because brown eyes are a dominant gene. And so that makes blue eyes, which are a recessive gene, rare. But we'll sort of get into the specifics of that as we go along. So basically, the person who kind of discovered genetics, or at least genetics in the sense of how genes are passed down, was this Austrian monk named Gregor Mendel. And Gregor Mendel, he was a monk, and he decided to start experimenting with pea plants. Why did he start to do that? I don't know, but he started experimenting by breeding short and tall pea plants, and he discovered that certain genes were passed down more often than others, which are called dominant genes, and the ones that were passed down less often were called recessive genes. Now, the name for different versions of a gene is alleles. So basically, if you've got one gene that controls the height of a pea plant, there's going to be a tall allele and a short allele. And you'll see at the bottom of the screen here, the alleles are represented by letters. An uppercase letter is going to mean it's a dominant gene or allele, and a lowercase is going to be a recessive gene. And so when I go on to the next slide here, you're going to see how that works. So you see here on the right, this is what's called a Punnett Square. So I'm cutting this in. I recorded this later. I just want to show you guys some examples using the screen share of what a Punnett Square looks like. So let's say that the classic trait is blue eyes, right? And you have two parents. You got blue eyes and brown eyes. So the capital T is going to represent the brown eye trait, because brown eyes are dominant, and the lowercase t is going to represent the blue eye trait. So let's say we had one brown-eyed parent who was a hybrid who had a blue-eyed trait, and we had one blue-eyed parent. So if your mom had blue eyes and your dad had brown eyes, there's still a possibility that you could have blue-eyed children. So here we go. In one, all we do is we match up the sides. So in 1/4 of the cases, we're going to have the same traits as the father. We're going to have a dominant trait and a recessive trait, and that's going to mean that we have brown eyes. In this case, if you get this gene, the recessive blue-eyed gene from the dad, you're going to have recessive genes. You're going to have blue eyes. Here, brown eyes again, and here is going to be blue eyes. Now, what happens if you have the dad has only, he's a pure brown-eyed gene example. So if the dad or the mom has brown eyes and only has brown-eyed traits, no matter what, all the children are going to have brown eyes. So even if the mom has blue eyes, 2 small t's there, every single one of these squares is going to look the same. So what that means is that while all the children are going to have brown eyes, it also means that each one of these children is capable of creating blue-eyed children. So as long as any of these children doesn't mate with someone who has two dominant brown-eyed genes, then they could have a blue-eyed child, potentially. Okay. So then let's take an example of how 2 brown-eyed parents could potentially make a blue-eyed child. So let's say, let's say that both parents look like this. So you have both parents that have brown eyes, but they have a recessive blue eye allele, which means that they're showing as being they're showing as being brown-eyed, but they have that trait. So let's see. In this case, it looks like almost all of the children of this example are going to be brown-eyed. All of these are going to be brown-eyed children because they have the dominant allele. They have that dominant trait of brown eyes. But then this child, 1 out of 4 chance, you're going to have a blue-eyed child. And so this applies to any trait. The important thing is, again, let's do one more example. Whenever you're doing a Punnett square, remember that a capital letter is dominant and a lowercase letter is recessive. So no matter what you're doing, you're always going to have, you're going to match up. You're going to see, so we just bring this one down and this one over, and this one comes down and then it comes over. This one comes down and this one comes over. Just like that. This is how you figure it out, and then that's how you figure out your odds. So 50% is going to be a pure dominant, and looks like 50% here is going to be a hybrid dominant. So that's how you figure it out. That's the whole thing. Hopefully that helps a little bit, and then I'll get back to the video here and we'll answer some questions. Okay. Monohybrid cross is a mating between 2 parents that differ only in one trait that uses a 4-box Punnett square. That's what we're seeing right here. So basically this is just explaining what a Punnett square is. It reveals the possible genotypes and the phenotypes and the probabilities of each type. So each of these boxes represents a 25% chance. And then these are the terms for what the different combinations mean. So it's something is homozygous if both traits, if both alleles are the same. So if you have 2 dominant, if I have blue eyes and I have 2 dominant, two genes that both say that I have blue eyes, that would be homozygous. So that would be 2 small t's basically. And if I had brown eyes and it's not possible for me to have any color other than brown, I might have homozygous brown eyes, which would be 2 big T's. But if I had a combination, if I had brown eyes but I still have a blue eye gene, I might have a big T and a small t. And that's what these these P's on the top are, where you got a big Y and a small y. That's because it is a yellow P, but it has a green recessive trait. Okay, so let's just go over some vocabulary. This is called a Punnett Square. Punnett Square is what this box is called. These things across the top, all of the letters, these are called alleles, and these are just the different representations of genes. So the large ones, the uppercase ones, are the dominant genes or dominant alleles, and the lowercase ones are the recessive genes or the recessive alleles. Okay, then the actual genes that you get, the genetic representation, is called a genotype, and that's actually the genes that make up the final result of the offspring. But that's different than the actual physical traits, which is called the phenotype. Phenotype. So we've got this one, let's say this one right here, for example, has a genotype of a hybrid, dominant, and recessive. So it's, if this was a pea plant, it has a tall dominant allele or gene for the tall plant, and a recessive short gene or allele. But its phenotype, or its physical appearance, is a tall pea plant. Because it's got the dominant gene, that means it's a tall plant. Okay, a couple more vocabulary terms. We've got homozygous and heterozygous. So homozygous means that both traits are the same. So for example, 2 dominant genes or 2 recessive genes would be homozygous. That means that the plant is always going to have the same outcome, or both of its genes are the same. So it's not a 50-50 chance of what gene it's going to pass on. It's going to pass on the same allele no matter who it's paired up with. Now that might result in different pairings depending on what the partner is, but then the other type is heterozygous. And that just means that it has 2 different alleles, a dominant and a recessive, which means that it could pass on either. So if this was pea plants, the offspring of a heterozygous hybrid pea plant could be tall or short. If this was the gene for brown or blue eyes, the offspring could have brown or blue eyes, depending on who it was paired with. So those are really kind of the main vocab terms that you need to know here. So we can go over some questions. Okay, so let me kind of zoom in on this a little bit. Okay, so we're going to do these questions right here. So questions 1 through 3 refer to the following paragraph and diagram. The Punnett Square below shows all the possible combinations of alleles for height in offspring pea plants when 2 tall hybrid pea plants are crossed. A capital T represents the dominant tallness gene, and a lowercase t the recessive shortness gene. One parent's alleles are shown along the top of the square. The others are shown on the left side. The genotypes of the offspring are shown in the boxes. So that's what we just talked about. So basically along the top and along the side here are the 2 parent peas, and then in the boxes are all the different possible combinations, all the different possible outcomes from those 2 peas breeding. So the parent pea plants are both tall, short, or of medium height. So they both have a dominant tall gene and a recessive short gene. Now, if we have one dominant gene, that's the one that's going to show. So that means that the parent pea plants are both tall. That would be the answer. What chance is there that an offspring will be short? Okay, so we're looking at this and we remember that only a offspring that has all recessive genes will actually show the recessive gene, because if there's any dominant genes at all, the dominant thing is going to show. So in 3 of these boxes, there's at least one capital T, which means that's the dominant tall gene. In this box right here, there are two small t's, which is the recessive short gene, which means that in this one box, you're going to have a short pea plant, which means B is the answer, 1 out of 4. So if you wanted to grow only tall pea plants in your garden over several growing seasons, which of the following genotypes would give you the best results? So we've got, if you wanted to grow only tall plants, which of the following genotypes? Okay, so we've got A is two small genes. That's not going to be good because that is always going to always give us a chance that we're going to have small. B is going to give us a chance if it's bred with something that also has a small gene, and C is the same as B, really. So the only thing that is going to guarantee that we're only going to get tall plants is to have D, which has only dominant genes. Because if you have this plant that you're breeding from, no matter what it breeds with, even if it's breeding with A, where it's two small pea plant genes, you're still going to have tall plants. So D would be the answer. It's going to guarantee you tall plants. Okay. Number 4, fill in the blank with a numeral. According to the passage on page 516, in order to show a recessive trait, an organism must inherit blank recessive alleles for that trait. Okay, so in order for it to show a recessive trait, we know that it has to have all recessive traits. If it has even one dominant trait, then it's not going to show the recessive trait. So an organism must have 2 recessive alleles for that trait is the correct answer. Okay, why are organisms that reproduce sexually more genetically diverse than organisms that reproduce asexually? Let's see. Organisms that produce sexually tend to produce more offspring than those that reproduce asexually. Do we know that? If we're taking this test, it's possible that that's true or that's not true, but that's not information that we know or that is relevant to this question, really. Organisms that reproduce sexually produce offspring that inherit diverse traits from only one parent. Well, that's not true because they inherit traits from both parents, right? So C, organisms that reproduce sexually produce offspring with entirely new traits, unlike those of either parent. That is not true, right? Because each offspring has one trait from each parent. They get their 2 traits because they have one from each. And then D, organisms that reproduce sexually produce offspring that have inherited a mix of traits from their parents. That's the correct answer. Because like we see in these Punnett squares, we're always getting one trait, one allele from each of our parents. So it's a 50-50 mix of traits. So it's an entirely new, unique organism that has a mix of traits from their parents. So that's the answer because that produces something new, which is genetically diverse. Okay, 6. A student is trying to repeat Mendel's experiments using the trait of fur color in rabbits. Black fur is dominant and white fur is recessive. Okay, she starts with what she assumes is a purebred white female rabbit and a purebred black female rabbit. She crosses them and is surprised when one of the offspring has white fur. What probably was wrong with the student's experiment? Okay, so we've got what she thinks is a purebred white and a purebred black, and we know that black fur is dominant. And if it really was a purebred black, then all of their children, all of their offspring would be black because that black gene is dominant. But one of them was white, which means that something went wrong. Let's see what the possible answers are. A, the white female was actually a hybrid. It's not possible for the white female to be a hybrid because if she had even one black gene, she would have been black. The black male was actually a hybrid. So this is probably the correct answer, because if the black male was a hybrid, that would mean that he would have one recessive white gene, which means that he has a 25% chance when we're having offspring with the white female to have a white offspring. But let's check the other answers. C, most of the offspring were hybrids. Well, we don't know that. Well, I mean, I guess technically most of the offspring were hybrids, but that's not what went wrong with the experiment. Okay, and then D, most of the offspring were purebred. That's also not what went wrong, and I think it's also not true. But B, the black female is actually a hybrid. That's what went wrong, because if he was actually purebred, then all of the offspring would have been black. But because he wasn't, white genes, at least in 1 out of 4 chances, the offspring was able to have 2 recessive white genes. So that would mean B would be the answer. Okay, so like I said, this was going to be sort of a short lesson. We're going to upload this online, and hopefully I did okay. And Mike will be back tomorrow with teaching his regular lessons. So anyway, hope everyone has a good day, and make sure you're staying up to date with the YouTube channel and the website. And if you need any help, you can always reach out to me or Mike or Sean or Terrence or any of us. We'll be happy to help. Okay, have a great day.